you very much.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. Just about still morning, in spite of my efforts to delay the previous speaker, so I'd have less time, but gives me more. You've probably seen, if you read my CV, that after a long career in business, etc., I am now doing a lot of lecturing. Now lecture in mainly PR and marketing and some economics, business studies and so on. And I'm going to do a little bit of that today, a little bit of theory. I'm sorry if that sounds boring, but I'm also going to throw in a lot of that 30-odd years of experience into it. You'll also see in the CV that I attended this university when it was a polytechnic. It was North Staffordshire Polytechnic, and most of this stuff wasn't even there then. In fact, there's an awful lot of stuff wasn't there then. For example, it was a mining college, British Coal or the National Coal Board, still a very big industry in Britain, and this was one of the leading mining colleges in the UK. So most of the students here then were men, and there were very few women. So it's much more evenly spread today, I think, with your social sciences and other humanities courses that you do. But Sue was also, I don't know if you know the lady over there on the side, she was a student same time as me, so we've known each other that long, that's why I'm here. But in those days, I started off doing law, got completely bored with law, or law got bored with me. So after a year I decided to change to do economics, which was much more my style of stuff. You can't argue much with the law. But you can argue with economics, and who can disagree with you, because it's all, as the previous speaker said, forecasting is something that is you're never wrong and you're never right until afterwards, and then nobody cares because you're doing your next forecast. And as part of that course we had a sociology lecturer who's a dour Scottishman, and dour Scot, and he used to all the time. And it's something I try and avoid as a public speaker and lecturer now, but I do fall into the habit of saying you know and this sort of thing, which is terrible when you know you're on camera up there and it's going to be recorded. We'll try and edit those bits out. But what we used to do with that lecturer was, when we got bored, which with sociology was after about 10 minutes, we used to break into three, and one of us was the ers, one of us was the ums, and one of us was the ah, and we used to see who won at the end of the lecture, and that kept us all going. So if I do sound as if I'm going on too long, one of you can be the your nose, one of you can be the ers, and take it from there. I got onto the economics course after a year I was told when I went to see the economics head tutor that he was a Guardian reader. Well, I'm from Oldham near Manchester. My dad always read the Guardian. It was the Manchester Guardian then. So I took with me to the interview a copy of the Manchester Guardian. This is something, always find out who the people are interviewing you are and what they're... Nowadays it's so easy. You can look them up on LinkedIn. You can look them up anything. Find out what their interests are. You're all probably final year. You're going to be looking for jobs if you haven't started already or got one already. But when you go in for your interviews, find out who these people are and look them up on Facebook, on Google, on Twitter, find out what their interests are and then go along. And I took the Guardian with me, and on the train, because I was going from Stoke to Stafford, on the train I was sitting doing the crossword, which I used to do with my old dad, every day from the age of about 11. I never really knew what I was doing, but I was good at guessing the answers. And when I got there, and the guy saw my Guardian and saw the crossword done, he said, "Have you got 3 across?" I said, "Yeah," and I gave him 3 across, and I got onto the course. So it's not always about how clever you are or how good you are, it's about knowing the right stuff. One other thing I would say, two last things about being here in Stoke-on-Trent. As I said, there weren't many women around then, but I met a girl who I got engaged to 42 years ago, and we're still married. It's amazing. Woo, thank you. Yes, it's a shock nowadays, I know, 42 years. And 16 years ago we had a big surprise when she became pregnant, and we had our second child as daughter. And this is why now I'm able to stand up in front of PR marketing students and teach social media. Because at Christmas, a good example, I thought I'd better find out, I'll just catch up with the latest stuff on social media. And I asked her, "How many social media are you actually on?" And she said 6. I said, "Doesn't sound a lot." But she said, "Now I'm on 6. I'm doing," and she had a phone, an iPad and a computer, and she was going from Snapchat to Twitter to Facebook messaging to Pinterest, switching across to God knows how many others. She's actually on 15 social media. You're all in your 20s. So you're probably in that era where you were brought up with social media, but I'll bet not many of you are actually on 15. That's the future. The gap between your generation and the one that's sneaking up just behind you have been born into Web 2.0, born into the internet age, born into mobile phones. I've got my iPhone here. I was looking at my Vodafone contract the other day. I've always been on Vodafone since 1989 when I got my first phone. That's how long mobile phones have been around. They were car phones then. When I was in quite a posh job then, a big job, and I used to have an assistant, and whenever I went from Birmingham where I was to London, he used to come with me to carry the battery for the mobile phone on the train. Felt really good then. Almost as good as having a chauffeur, but that's another story. The last thing I wanted to say about being here in Stoke-on-Trent was I moved house recently. I'm sort of semi-retired to Devon, in a lovely place. I drove up there this morning. I forgot how far north Stoke was. It's 220 miles. So if I fall asleep halfway through, I'll probably, wake me up. But I found this when we were moving house. It's my economics book that I bought. And it's always stood on the shelf, library shelf, for, again, 42 years. Amazing, isn't it? I've still got it. It's probably, should take it to Antiques Roadshow now, actually. It's probably worth a few bob. But the economics in it hasn't changed hardly at all. So what I'm going to talk about today is the three disciplines, in a way, that I've been most closely associated with as a student, as a lecturer, and in my career. Because you'll see I went from being an economist with an economics degree to be an economist at British Gas. I worked mainly in planning. It was sort of long-range planning, we called it in those days. And I moved from that into marketing to forecasting. Instead of forecasting gas sales, forecasting sales of appliances and new house applications for gas and so on. It's a sort of given now that everywhere has gas. You don't really, unless you live out in the wilds of Cumbria or Norfolk or somewhere, you've probably got gas in most homes. But in those days, gas was not beyond the towns. We only had town gas. And in the late 60s, we invented, I nearly said then, invented gas in the North Sea, discovered gas and oil in the North Sea. And of course, the rush then, the dash for gas, they called it, to get gas into every home, was one of the reasons why they needed a lot of economists to come along and try and persuade people, new housing developers, local authorities, to switch to gas because it was cheaper. I just heard today that BP may be closing the Brent North Sea oil field, which was one of the first ones open, one of the biggest in the world at the time. So something has happened in my whole lifetime that is come and gone. I moved from there into marketing. I got into advertising. Great job as an advertising manager with a big budget, doing lots. I think I made about 25 TV commercials, radio commercials. This was not quite the same period as Mad Men. That was the 1950s into 60s. This was 70s into 80s. But it was a great time of creativity on television in Britain. In 1979, mid-1980s this was, there was still only really one commercial TV channel, and just about started commercial radio. Then Channel 4 came along, Sky came along later, and so on and so on. But it was great stuff making ads for TV and so on. But I moved into PR, public relations, motor industry with Bosch, and corporate level at Lucas I became Director of Corporate Communications. These titles change, and they always ask you, what title do you want? And this is a tip for you. Never bother what title you've got. Just ask for more money. It's a good way. I don't care what you call me. You'll see at BMW there, I was Bevollmächtigter, which was BMW. Anybody speak German? Anybody? Befull? Plenty, yes. Mächtigter, potential. It was the English word for that is plenipotentiary. And I said, well, you're not calling me plenipotentiary, because we haven't had those since the days of Kipling in Victorian Edwardian times. Basically, it meant I was in charge of a London political office representing BMW to the Westminster, Whitehall, Downing Street, and so on, which was great. I had the best job in PR for a year, and then because I was just running up and down Whitehall, lunching with people in these fancy clubs. It was really good fun. And I had a driver and so on just to take me about 100 yards up the road, because BMW wouldn't have anybody walking, would they? To arrive in a fancy BMW. But then BMW decided to sell Rover Group, and for about a year I had the worst PR job in the world, because I was getting hammered by everybody. But it was good fun. A learning experience, we call them. A learning experience. I moved back into corporate affairs. So PR had become a big part of my life, but it wasn't just PR, it was corporate marketing. Because what you do at that level is you're not marketing a product, you're not selling a product, and you're not simply doing PR to the media either. You are marketing the business to its stakeholders, to investors, employees, future employees, universities, people like yourselves, trying to get people to come and work for you, to invest in you, to do business with you, and so on, at the very highest level. And that's what I did again at Smiths. But I got a little bit bored with that after nearly 30 years and started my own business, Marling Consulting, where I used to say it was, I used to introduce myself as saying, I do strategic consulting and reputation management. And this is sort of leaning on a bar, and then people would look at you rather oddly and say, do you mean PR? I say, yeah, okay, PR. So now I just say, I do PR. Well, that was, as it says there, 2 years ago. Behind all of those disciplines, economics, PR, marketing, what we're always trying to do is understand why people do something so we can influence what they do next. If you think about it, that's what you're trying to do in economics. We're trying to understand what causes inflation, what causes unemployment. Why do people save money when we get deflation? If you've listened to the news recently, you'll see we might be going into a period of deflation. Certainly they're probably into it in the rest of Europe, in the EU. Japan's been at it for 12 years, just coming out of it. Deflation means people stop spending money. What drives economies is consumer spending. 70% of the world's biggest economy, the US, is driven by consumer spending. 70%. Not investment, not government spending. 70%. It's a bit lower here in the UK because we have more government spending, most European countries do. But it's still a very, very big part. So when people stop spending money, the economy goes downhill. And deflation, you think, well, prices are coming down, aren't we going to spend more? No, we don't, because two reasons. One, we don't spend more money because we think the prices are going to be cheaper tomorrow. You know, why buy a house at £200,000 today when it might be worth £150,000 next year? Your mortgage will be lower and everything, interest rates low. But the other reason we don't spend money is because actually we're worried about that. The future, difficult to predict. Am I going to have a job? Is it going to be easy for me? So, understanding as an economist what people are doing now, why they do things, helps us forecast the future. In marketing, very obvious, we need to understand the background of people, why they do things, what puts them in a position, so we can focus, we can target them. You've all done marketing, I think. Targeting, segmentation, positioning, targeting. STP, targeting, understanding why people are doing things and trying to hit the people who are going to make you most money. And PR is the same. In PR we engage. We engage with our publics, our stakeholders. We need to understand what their issues are, so we can develop a relationship with them. So that's what we do. I'm just going to run through that fairly quickly. I've got about 20 slides here. I've got a couple of interactive bits for you to play, so it's not just me talking. So I usually reckon about 3 minutes a slide, so I'll have to do them in 2 minutes. That's a quote that from 1999 about the rational consumer, the rational economic actor. Economic theory is based solely on rationality. You've done maybe basic economics in difference curves, a theory of supply and demand. People will prefer this over this. They'll prefer this over this. And so you can draw a little line of how their preferences work, and that develops into a demand line, a demand curve. And that's how we derive theory in economics. It's basically assuming people will do what they did yesterday again, and that if a small group of people do it, everybody will do it. So you can get into statistics and econometrics and work out what things are going to happen in the future. But what's happened recently, or since about 1980, but it's much more it become much more acceptable now, much more the norm since about the mid-90s, is this idea that actually that doesn't always happen. It's more complicated than that. Can human decisions be modelled mathematically? And this is one of these examples for you now. When I worked at British Gas, I was doing some research on which is the best offer. In those days, British Gas had showrooms in every town. There'd be one in the middle of Stoke, probably one in Hanley, selling gas appliances. Remember, it was this gas boom going on, and we wanted everybody to buy appliances, central heating as well. So there was these shops selling these appliances. And we were trying to get more and more people to come in. So what was the best way to offer them? Was it a trade-in on their old cooker? I'll give you 30 quid off your old cooker, missus. Let's say they cost 300 quid. I'll give you 30 quid off. Or I'll give you a discount of £20. Or I'll give you 6 months interest-free credit. So for 6 months you pay a sixth of it. No interest rates. Now, you've got to remember, this is sort of 1981, 82, interest rate about 9%. Not like zero today, or zero in real terms. So 6 months interest-free credit was basically saying you don't have to pay anything, and well, pay a sixth of it for the next 6 months. But a 12 months interest-free credit was you don't have to pay it all now, pay a twelfth of it for every month. Now, which of you might think on a 300 quid cooker that the trade-in offer was the best one? Just hands up. Anybody who thought the trade-in was the best one? Okay. Don't be shy. It's okay. What about the 20 quid off? How many people think 20 quid off? So 2 off, you know, whatever it is, it's about 6-7% off. Who thinks discount was the best offer? Not many of you. Okay, 1 or 2. Who thinks 6 months interest-free credit is the better offer?
Out of interest, is the old cooker like functioning?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. No, we take them back. We take them back. It doesn't matter if it's working or not working. We take them back. So you've got to get rid of it anyway. So we'll give you 20 quid to take it away, or 30 quid it was. So by the difference between the 30 and the 20 is because we thought people ascribe a value to what they've got. Well, you're not having this for 20 quid. I can have 20 quid off and sell this second hand somewhere. So we gave them a tenner. But what about the 12-month interest-free credit? Who thinks that's the best offer? I hope you're all going to put your hands up now, because none of you have put your hands up for the other 3. That, in theory, and as far as we were concerned, we thought that was the best offer. If you work it out in monetary terms, 12 months at a 9% interest rate on 300 quid is actually probably equivalent to the £20 discount in terms of money. But it meant people could spread their money and earn interest on the money as well. So it actually became better. But what people chose was the 6-month interest-free credit. That came top by a long way. And we couldn't understand this. Why is 6 months interest-free credit more attractive than 12 months interest-free credit? So we went back and asked them. And what they said was, actually, we know 12 months interest-free credit on the face of it is a better offer. But 12 months is a long time. Unemployment was, this is early Thatcher days, remember, unemployment was going up to 15%. Over 10% for the first time, 2 million unemployed, etc. So things were looking pretty bad, and people were scared that they were going to lose their jobs. So 6 months was a horizon that allowed them to plan their expenditures, plan their incomes. They kind of knew they would be able to pay it off within 6 months. They wouldn't lose the jobs, and even if they did, they'd get some payoff and they'd be able to pay it. But 12 months was a long way off. So we started, that was one of the first times I started to understand that consumers don't always do the obvious. They don't always behave in what you think is a rational way. That's led economics onto the theories of behavioural economics, which this guy Tim Harford in the FT, great piece in the FT, if you find it, on the 22nd of March last year, it's a good one to read, about behavioural economics and nudge theory. And he called it a fashionable crossbreed of psychology and economics. In other words, we're bringing in psychology to the study of economics. And it's trying to work out some of these irrational choices that consumers make. It's trying to say, you know, well, why do people rate that one above the other? And the answer is because their situation might be different, their background might be different, the way they think might be different, the way they react to things might be different. And it's trying to develop theories, different kinds of theories to explain and therefore help to predict why people will do what they do. So old theories and predictions of economics were challenged. But Harford, again, one of the things he said is, or is this actually just common sense? Because when you think through that example I gave you, well, yeah, it makes sense. If a lot of people, if you understood the psyche of the time, and an awful lot of people were frightened they would lose their jobs, or they weren't secure in their income and the jobs, or they thought taxes may go up, etc., or interest rates might shoot up, then maybe 6 months was a good enough horizon. So it's just common sense. One of the theories of behavioural economics is about the way people evaluate loss and gain. They evaluate what they're going to get out of something and what they're going to lose out of something. Marketing has a very similar theory of the way we ascribe value to something, where we say it's a perception of gain over a perception of loss, is the value that we give to something. There's lots of ways of doing value. Maybe I'll go into that when we look at marketing. Interest-free is good because it's not paying for it now, but 12 months is a long time, so 6 months is preferred. And that's why behavioural economics can explain that sort of aberration from rational economic thinking. But the trouble with behavioural economics is, according to some people, that it starts to analyse every single situation and find a reason for it. Every single situation and find a reason for it. And the minute you start doing that, you're starting to lose theory altogether. You're getting very empirical, very practical, and your normative solutions and all that sort of stuff. You're coming in and analysing every situation and saying, well, that explains it, something different happened over here. That explained it, something different happened over here. And the old-fashioned, if you can call them that, economists said, well, yeah, but if you put it all together, on average, it tends to work this way. And I think that was the old rule of economics, that agglomerating things or accumulating things together and looking at observations on a massive scale then taught you that, or showed you that, the pattern is going this way, the pattern will probably carry on going that way. And that can have very straightforward problems, though. It can cause very straightforward problems. When I was forecasting the sales of wall heaters, now you've probably never heard of a wall heater. When we were selling gas fires and cookers and central heating, there was somebody invented this thing called a wall heater, which was a gas heater you stuck on the wall in a cold spot in your house. Maybe it had an extension, stick a wall heater there. Or the hall was cold because you couldn't get a radiator in, stick a wall heater there. And we were selling probably 120,000 a year of these things, and then suddenly they started to dip. And so they came to the marketing people and said, how are we going to sell more? How are we going to find out what's happening? And we did all sorts of analysis on this and looked at trends and looked at all this. And two things became clear. One was, we might have reached saturation point. We might have got to the point where everybody who needs one or wants one has got one. Why? God, we looked at that a long time. And then, of course, somebody came up with the idea that, well, actually, this is gas, not electric. You don't have to run a wire. You have to dig a hole in the floor or on the wall and put a pipe there, run it around the house to the thing, put it on, have a vent going out to an outside wall. This is a very complicated piece of equipment, and it needs more than just a little plug. And so we came up with this idea as how we're going to sell more. We worked out that if we wrote to everybody who lived next door to somebody who just bought one, they're the most likely people to need one, because they've got the same type of house, therefore the same type of hall and the same type of living standards, etc., etc. And that worked for a while, and then it went away. Anyway, behavioural economics inspired nudge theory. Have you heard of nudge theory? Have you studied nudge theory, where you basically try to get people to do something, behave in a certain way, by giving them a simple message that isn't telling them to do something or even asking them to do something. It's kind of just suggesting that they do something. And to go to a very crude level, I always think this is funny, but it's very crude level. One of the earliest applications of it was some people in an airport in, I think it was in Amsterdam or Brussels, can't remember now, one of those airports where, because in the men's urinals it was always messy on the floor. They had the bowls, and it was always messy. Sorry, ladies, but this is true. They're always messy because men were missing. It's one of the things about being a man, you know. So it's missing, especially if they're in a hurry, they're going to catch a plane or they've just got off one. So the cleaners were having to go in every sort of hour and clean the toilets and so on. So somebody came up with the idea that if you put a little fly in the middle of the urinal, men would aim at that. And you know what? It worked. There's no sign saying, please be tidy, please be clean. It was just that. And it worked. And if you go around Europe and go to the airports and see, there's a lot of them do that now. And it stopped the cleaners going in 8, 9, 10 times a day, and they went in twice, and it was clean. It worked. Now, that's a very basic example of nudge theory. Other parts of nudge theory, how do we get people to eat 5 a day? How do we get people to put the seatbelts on? How do we get people to stop drinking, stop smoking? How do we get people to exercise more? All these problems that we know, if we solve them, are going to change the world, because there'll be nobody with diabetes, there'll be nobody with going to the accident emergency units of the hospitals, the bill for the NHS would go down, etc., etc. But how do we get people to do it? And how do we get people, for example, to donate organs? How do we get people to sign up to the organ register? Do you say, do you know somebody's dying because they need an organ? It's very sad. Or would you say, please sign up to donate your organs if you die, because you never know when you might need one. You know, you don't need them when you're dead, obviously, but somebody else might. And they worked out, somebody did a big piece of research on this and worked out actually the one that works best is to say 400,000 people a year are signing up for organ donation. Why don't you? So they're just basically saying other people are doing this. And that is one of the perfect examples of nudge theory, just to say, well, other people are doing this, why don't you do it? You know, and so the signs you see on roads now, 7 people died on this road in 2014. Okay, it says slow, it says care, it says this. 7 people died on this road or on bikes, they'll say 5 bikers killed on this road last year. If you're riding a bike, or if you're driving along those roads and you see that, you slow down. It doesn't tell you to. It doesn't even invite you to. It just gives you a fact. And that's called nudge theory. And that started with behavioural economics, and it's moving now into other fields as well. In the field of marketing, we have the theory of consumer behaviour. This is something you're probably, falling over myself there, more familiar with. Marketing tries to identify customers by segmenting them into types. And hence we examine their history and influences. What have they done before? What appeals to them? What makes them do what they do? What makes them as they are? And we look at the marketing stimuli. You know, the 4 Ps, price, product, place and promotion. I hate things like that, but it's a good way to remember stuff, isn't it? You know, because somebody actually squeezed in place, didn't they? You know, place is not really the term you would normally use, but it makes sense for the 4 Ps. Or the other Ps later on if you go into service, the 7 Ps. But we add into that political, economic, technological and cultural stimuli. So where are these people from? Do they have a religion? Do they practice the religion? Did the parents give them that religion, or did they acquire it themselves? Technology. How technologically aware are they? You know, if you're trying to market and open a store perhaps in a particular town, and you want, I'm a techie, I want to open a techie store, a software broadband store, but they haven't got broadband. A great deal of the British population, particularly in the rural areas, still have not got access to broadband. They don't have wires passing their house. They don't have cables that are the right sort to be able to download BT Infinity. You know, it's BT had promised me Infinity at my new home in Devon last November. It's February now and I still haven't got it, but they're working on it. But you would understand, you would do that sort of thing first, that then you would go to people and find out what sort of technological awareness they have, what level of mobile phones maybe people have got, You know, there are still people who don't have iPhones or any sort of Android phone and so on. I mean, I had this one. Not this one. I've had an iPhone since they came out. I was one of the first people to be given an iPhone by Vodafone. I just wanted a normal phone, really. And I said, actually, I'm wondering about BlackBerry. And they said, would you try an iPhone? I said, but they're not out till March. They said, no, we've got some on test, so try one. And I took it. I said, well, great. First people to have an iPhone. And the only trouble was, whenever they rang me, I couldn't hear what they were saying. And when I spoke to them, they could hear me, but I couldn't hear what they were saying. And it didn't ring. And I went into a shop. Actually, in Oldham, where I'm from, I was visiting somebody, and I said to the woman at the counter, I said, can you tell me how to get the sound on here? Because I've read through all the stuff, and it had a handbook, and it told you how to do all this. Couldn't figure out how to do it. And she said, I've no idea. She said, I haven't been trained yet. I'll get my training next week. Anyway, she rang somebody up, and they said, see that little button on the side? You just go like that, and it goes on. And we'd all been too frightened to touch the button. Techno fear, you know, it might break. What if it comes off? But now, of course, I'm, you know, relaxed and happy with it. I just give it to my daughter, and she shows me how to work everything. You know, if you buy an Android phone now, if you buy a new Android phone, read through the quick how-tos. It doesn't tell you how to make a phone call. Just next time you buy a phone, or if you look in your instructions, it doesn't tell you how to make a phone call, does it? It tells you how to get on the internet. It tells you how to do social media and so on. It doesn't tell you how to do that. Anyway, moving on from this, we also look at consumer characteristics, the cultural, social, and personal backgrounds, the very personal stuff. We start to analyse, you know, the type of schooling they had, the type of area they grew up in, the social groups that they form, the personal likes and dislikes, and the personal characteristics. But that's not enough. We've moved on from that. And this is some time ago, and marketing, I think, did this first, even before about probably the same time as behavioural economics was growing. We started to look at consumer psychology. We started to go away from this idea that rational decision making, which was always the assumption in marketing as much as it was in economics, and understand people's motivations. We started to try and understand what made them do something. Why did they do that? Ask the question why. And understand their perception. Remember I said that one of the ways of assessing value is to people's perception of gain over their perception of loss. Okay, I'm going to spend some money on this, and I'm going to lose that. That's a perception of loss. But what I'm going to get is a new toothbrush, some new toothpaste, a new iPhone. I'm going to get access to the internet on the move. I'm going to get all these lovely things, which I haven't got now. Therefore, it's worth me paying this money. My perception of gain is greater than my perception of loss. And we also want to understand how they learn things, how they gather knowledge, how they gain knowledge. Not whether they do it on the internet or in lectures or whatever, but how does the brain process the knowledge? And we start moving into here, and memory is a similar thing, we start moving into here neurology. And the science of neurology 15 years ago existed, but wasn't really important. It didn't really make it wasn't clever enough to understand how it affected people's decision making. Now it is. Now we have genetics as well coming in. We understand the chemicals that go on in your brain and the left and right sides and so on. Psychiatrists, anybody know the difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist? One of them's a scientist and the other one's a practitioner. If you find out, will you remind me, because I've forgotten which is which. I always forget which is which. I think the psychologist is the person who is the scientist who thinks about these things. The psychiatrist is the person who practices. But they're sort of now trying to help explain to us and help us to understand quite how people take what they've learned, the culture, all that other background stuff that we looked at before, and make decisions. You know, your left-right brain stuff, the chemicals going on there, transferring into the brain. So your feelings, your emotions can affect your decisions. And we all know that. You know, my daughter, when she's feeling down and depressed, buys a big bar of Galaxy. And she asked me to get her one the other day, and I got her a big bar of Galaxy just to cheer her up. And I took it home and she said, "That's not a big bar." I thought, she must be really down today, you know. But she's a teenage girl. I'm sorry, teenage boys are the same. But teenage boys tend to go out and kick a football, where girls can't go out and kick anything, just unless they're soccer players, of course. Which my daughter was trying to be a soccer player, but she hurt her ankle. But we try and understand why people make these decisions right at the point of decision. What influences them? But there's a problem with that, isn't there? Because if we're trying to theorize that, in the same way as behavioral economics trying to theorize people's decision making and accumulate it up to big theory, with consumer psychology, we're going to have to go to almost everybody and say, well, this person has exactly the same background, exactly the same age, gender, religion, everything else as this person, yet this person is always happy, this person is always sad, and they make different decisions. So do we have to go down to every person and understand how they behave? And what does that do for theory? How do we plan a marketing campaign to sell more Galaxy bars if we got to analyse everybody and say, well, these people over here are going to be demanding it tomorrow because Stoke City just lost again. I don't mean again. I mean, I know. Anybody follow Stoke City here? You must be. A few of you must be. I'm a Manchester United fan, so we're going to lose to Cambridge tonight and make FA Cup history. But United are very good at making FA Cup history. It's just a different way of doing it. Good. So that's where I am on marketing. This is the buying decision process, the consumer behaviour process. Obviously, I think you've probably all seen that before. How we recognise a problem and move towards making a decision, move through the brand choice, price choice, and so on, cost timing method. So that's what I'm saying. How do we use that, or how do we use our previous theory, our consumer psychology theory, to describe that if we have to do it on a very individual level? And here's another one, another little quiz. In the car industry, in 1985, when I worked for Bosch, we introduced ABS, Antriebsschlupfregelung, Anti-Blockierungssysteme, it was called in German. But in Britain, it became known as anti-blocking or anti-locking system. It stops the brakes from locking in a skid. That's what it was designed to do. And we had to try and get that across to people. We had to try and tell people that this was a good thing, but it was very difficult to do, because when we asked the question, when we said to them, what do you think it does, they said, well, does it stop you quicker? And the answer is no, it doesn't stop you quicker, not in every circumstance. In some, nowadays, in most circumstances it will, but in those days on ice, on slippy roads, it wouldn't necessarily stop you quicker. What it does is it allows you to steer while you're driving. And I'll never forget, I was in one of the early cars once, and I was driving along a road up in Worcester where I lived then, bit slippy on the roads, and this car pulled out the side road, parked cars there, couldn't see properly, pulled out the side road, and I could see the driver in front of me do that. Yeah, she looked at me and saw me coming. I was only doing about 20, but she saw me and did that. And I sort of hit the brakes. I'd done all the training, of course, I knew what I was doing, drove around the car and ended up like that. And then I looked back and she was still like that and waiting for the hit, and she looked round and she looked over there and I wasn't there anymore. And she looked over there and she sort of mouthed, she couldn't say the word, she said, "How did you do that? How did you do that?" And I just went, as if I went over the top. Of course I didn't, but and she never knew, I just drove off. To this day she still doesn't know how I got round. But we offered somebody a perceived value of 500 quid now, because you know car companies offer options that you have to pay for. And before ABS came pretty much standard on most modern cars, it was an option. It was actually very expensive at first. It was about 2,000 quid as an option. It came down in the early 90s, mid-90s, to something like this. So you could have central locking on your car as an option. You could have metallic paint, or you could have ABS. Which do you think people chose most? Who thinks they chose metallic paint? Quite a few of you. Who thinks they chose ABS, the safety option? And who thinks they chose the central door locking, security option? The metallic paint one is right. Right? People, if they had a choice, they could only have one of those for free, if you like. They chose the metallic paint. Why would people choose that? ABS saved your life. Central door locking secured your car. Why would you want the metallic paint? And the answer is, it was the flashy option. It's the one everybody else could see. It's the affluent option. It's a sign, isn't it? In those days, 90s, metallic paint was, that car's got metallic paint. It's really nice. You couldn't see ABS. You couldn't see central door locking, but you could see metallic paint, so that was the one they chose. So people weren't behaving rationally on that choice in their marketing options. So when you're marketing this stuff, you're trying to sell people ABS, it was very, very difficult to explain why it was of more value, it saved lives, than an option that showed that they were better off. So again, trying to understand people's psyche. Supermarkets do it as well. Obviously, you've probably had these examples. You walk into a supermarket, and what's the first thing they have? What's the first thing they have when you walk into a supermarket?
Sandwiches.
Sandwiches on one side next to the vegetables. Not all of them. Normally sandwiches are just around the corner because you have to walk past something. Sometimes they have newspapers too, but there's one of the biggest stores I go to where the newspapers are at the furthest end of the store. So if you're coming in for just a newspaper, you've got to walk through the whole store to get one. No, they put flowers, fruit and vegetables. Why? Because that appeals to all the senses. You can smell them. You can see the colours. And they play music around you as well, so you can hear them, and it's ambient music. It's something the Americans worked on in the 50s and really got to understand what makes people shop. And that's not really rational, is it? It's not really, you are not going in for flowers. How many times you stand at a supermarket till and somebody says, I only came in for a loaf of bread, and they've got a basket full of stuff. They've impulse buying. They've been kidded, if you like, into buying stuff that they weren't trying to buy in the first place. So is that rational and predictable? Can we know what people will buy, or is it individual? Are we all individual? Just a couple of things on public relations to show where that theory's gone as well. PR, at very basic level, it's about establishing relationships, public and relationships. It's about, if you read the CIPR, the Chartered Institute's definition, it's about establishing relationships with your publics or with your stakeholders. And Grunig, a theorist in 1982, developed the excellence model through the 90s. He developed this model where he talks about two-way symmetrical communications, where we get together, we have a conversation, we both try and solve each other's problems and reach a mutually satisfying conclusion. And this is particularly so of issues management, when we're talking about people, publics, who gather together around issues like HS2. I noticed one of our speakers was somebody who promoted HS2 Birmingham International Station as a hub for HS2 and fought for HS2 to happen. But that's the sort of thing. It created many publics, people along the route who didn't want it. The London end, at Birmingham end, and all the way along, they didn't want HS2. Somewhere like Stoke probably wants a little stopping point somewhere around here, Crewe maybe, Stoke, so that you can drive to it and get on it and get to London, Paris, Brussels, Berlin quicker, or the other end, Newcastle, and so on. And the win-win solution has been at the heart of PR theory for a very long time. But it assumes that power is equally balanced between one side, an organisation maybe, a big corporation or the government or a local authority, and the publics, which might be a small group of people who live in one street or a little village on the route of HS2. It's one of the things they did with HS2. They knew that the majority of people who they'd have to persuade were in London. They were the ones who benefit most. The people who'd be most anti along the route are small communities who tried to band together, but we're never going to win. I was asked, because I lived in Buckinghamshire at the time, I was asked by one of the groups to come and help them maybe fight the cause against it, and I said, you're not going to win. I've never known a time where Labour, Liberal, Democrat and Conservative parties all said, at the next election we will all support HS2. So you're not going to win. I said, what you should be fighting for is compensation. And of course they didn't. And then eventually they now realise that they should be fighting for compensation, but it's already been done. And a lot of them are going to lose out. Motives drive content and content. What we write in PR is supposed to be to engage our publics, but it's on behalf of the corporation or the organisation or the government. You never see a political party engaging with its publics until it gets criticised. Then it's all about open consultation and so on. An employee who's paid, or a consultant who's paid for by an organisation, will always act in the interests of that organisation, won't they? And actors, people, the publics and so on, will always act in their own interests, which, if you like, is rational. But try talking to a SIF. You know what a SIF is? Anybody know what a SIF is? A single issue fanatic. Somebody who has one big issue in their lives and they are going to go on about it. It might be somebody who's objecting to his neighbour's Leylandii growing too high and gets obsessed about it and eventually cuts them down and goes to prison for doing silly things. It might be somebody who's objecting to HS2 and a party group gets together and they spend all their time fighting HS2. It might be somebody at a larger level, like Greenpeace, like Friends of the Earth, anti-capitalist, anti-vivisection. They have one big issue and you will never, ever get them to change their minds. The theorists tell you that you should engage with them and talk to them and establish an understanding, a relationship, and then develop a two-way, mutually beneficial communication. I've tried that and it doesn't work because they're not ever going to change their minds. What they want is for you to be the one to change your mind. So the logic, the theories of PR start to dissipate and dissolve into a mess of, well, what does that really mean? How can we talk to these people? Do we understand where they're going to, where they're from? And because of that, a new theory is developed. It's actually a very old theory called persuasion, very old. Aristotle started it way back in the time of the ancient Greeks. And it sort of fell out of fashion when the Grunig theories of the 1980s and 90s became the core PR theory. The idea that you could engage with mutually two-way symmetrical communication and so on, where we both get something out of it. This is much more about getting people to change their attitudes by having a better argument. Think of Parliament. Think of debating chambers. That's what this is all about. And persuasion is about having a good narrative, about good content, if you like, about building a story, but arguing it better than the other guy argues their position. The Perloff book of 2010, I've got the references at the end, is a very good one. Aristotle said persuasion had three elements. I always forget what these are, so I think of the Three Musketeers. Why can I remember the Three Musketeers more than I can remember ethos, logos and pathos? You know what the Three Musketeers are called? Well, it's been a television thing. Athos, Porthos and Aramis. Well, you've got ethos, athos, Porthos, pathos. Aramis is the logos. Okay, doesn't quite work. But Aramis is a men's aftershave, isn't it? It was very popular in the 1970s when I was at this university. Could always smell the lads down the street who were using Brut or Aramis and so on. In the student bar, it got overwhelming sometimes. I told you there were more men than women, you know, and the rugby club changing room was awful after a match. It really was. But that's how I remember it. But one of these appeals to the credibility of the speaker, the ethos, the nature of the speaker, how much we trust the speaker. Logos is the speaker's appeal to reason. Oh, you often hear politicians say, any reasonable person would understand that. They're already pushing you into that idea that you're a reasonable person. That's called priming as well, by the way. And pathos is appealing to your emotions. So persuasion is actually coming into this idea of psychology now, trying to understand what you are feeling and how we can tap into those feelings to make you change your mind. And Britain as a country has got very emotional in the last 20, 30 years. We didn't used to be stiff upper lip and all that. But we got very emotional when Princess Diana died in the 91, 92, I've forgotten how she died. Was it 97, much later? Okay, sorry, yes it was 97, I remember now. And I think it was a Saturday morning, Saturday morning. And we all woke up to this thing that she died. The nation mourned, and we'd never seen anything like it. It tapped into this feeling at the time that the whole country was in a bit of a mess, you know. The Tories had been in power for a very long time. John Major was Prime Minister. My God, that really tapped it. Or he just left, actually, and Tony Blair came in and did his famous speech in the back of Downing Street. But think of people who use persuasion and use the Aristotle's arts, the Churchill's, Kennedy, Martin Luther King, the great speeches. Imagine if they were on webcast today. Imagine if Martin Luther King was live when he was giving that speech around the world. Would it have changed the world quicker than he did just doing it in Washington and then it spreading all around? I have a dream. I think it probably would. The trouble is, I can't think of anybody today who could do that. There's not many people around who are strong enough to do that. Lehrer has come up with this theory of pluralistic decision making, and this applies not just to PR but to economics and to marketing as well. I'll just pick out one or two of these. He suggests we're not either rational or irrational. A brain is pluralistic. It can do a lot of things at the same time. It can make a lot of decisions. It can cope with stress and depression, but make positive decisions for the future. It's a messy network of different areas, many of which are involved with the production of emotion. It's very, again, if you're interested in this field, I've got the reference at the back. It's a very good book to read. A bit heavy, but it's not too bad for understanding the basics of it. And just to throw in one last thing about PR, I don't know where that blue W came from, but there we are. We assume an agglomerated view in reputation management. Bit of what I do, we assume that your reputation as an organisation is this. Well, it isn't, is it? Because, you know, if you would probably, even now, all have a completely different, not completely different, but a different idea of what I am, of who I am, of the sort of person I am. I've told you a lot about me, but you might be sitting there thinking, God, he's boring, he's dull, he's going on a bit, that Lancashire accent is a bit drawly and so on. And he's an old bald guy, a bit overweight. So I am. I tend to think of myself as much more the sort of person who was here, a much younger chap with hair, and none of this, and fit, and healthy, and not boring as well. So we all have different views on each other, and so can you add all those up to create a bigger idea of reputation? If I asked you all individually, what do you think of BP's reputation at the moment? Mostly, I would expect people of your age and backgrounds to be critical. But you might have different views if you drive a car and BP's your local station. You might have different views if your parents work for BP. You might have different views if you grew up in an oil industry country, etc., etc. You might all have a slightly different view. So BP's reputation is individual to all of you. But when you put it together, you can assume certain things about it, but it doesn't always work. So, how do we manage everybody? Psychology and neurology moving into the frame. I've mentioned this before. We've got something called the elaboration likelihood model, which says the brain works at two levels. It can do an in-depth analysis, or it can be very superficial. And this is great for marketeers now. This is in marketing. This is a theory that's growing and growing all the time, where we can say, yes, we can make logical, rational decisions, and you can assume that that's the way most people would go. But on the other hand, sometimes people are very superficial, and they just buy that one because that's the one they want, and they've had it before, and it's not that clever. Priming and framing. Priming is where I might say to you, God, you're a wonderful student. You work really hard. I can tell by the assignments you put in, and that makes you feel good. And framing is that I'm now going to talk about this. Framing, the best example is if you see a guy standing with a microphone like this and behind him is a big black door with the number 10 on it, what's he going to talk about? What is he going to talk about? There's number 10 Downing Street. I'll give you another clue. Number 10 Downing Street behind. What's he going to talk about?
Budget cuts.
Probably. If he's outside Westminster, you know that shot they always have on the green with the towers and Big Ben behind. What's he going to talk about? Parliament. Yeah, that's framing, very loosely, when people give you an idea, and they can do it in a narrative. When I woke up this morning, I looked out the window, and the sun was just starting to break through over the sea, because I have a view of the sea from my lovely new house in Devon, and the river Tean flowing down, the mist was rolling down it with the cold. I'm setting a scene, that's sort of framing for what's coming next. Cognitive dissonance, rationalizing internal conflicts, another theory that's coming through very strongly now, the idea that we reassess our behaviors and beliefs if we don't like one or the other. So our beliefs are fairly strong, and if somebody's trying to tell us that something's not quite right and we should be doing it this way, we very often will change our behaviours and sometimes change our beliefs so that we don't have this dissonance, if you like, disconnect between the two. And you've probably all done Maslow's triangle, have you, where you climb up through the needs and wants of your life to self-esteem. And self-esteem is the area that is most complex for us to understand. It's a bit like the metallic paint, yeah? You choose the metallic paint instead of a safety or security option because it makes you feel better. It makes you feel better in the view of everybody else. So, psychology and neurology. So just to finish off, can we agglomerate the way people behave? Probably, on a mass level. Can we make assumptions on populations, markets and publics? Yes, we can. One of my mottos has always been never assume. Always check. That means always check stuff, because somebody's probably not done what they're supposed to do. But we can make assumptions about big issues. Understanding how the brain works physically and mentally is a signpost. It can help us. But as an economist, yes, I always want to make assumptions. As a marketeer, you have to know how to define target groups. And as a PR person, I always want to know my publics. So where are we? Just a thought. I haven't mentioned, apart from my daughter, social media. I haven't said how is social media affecting all this. Is social media changing the world? We saw the previous speaker talk about Internet of Things, how and the engagement with social media is changing things, is making things different. But what happens is publics come and go like tides. If you get an issue on Twitter, trending on Twitter, how long does it take an issue to reach its peak on Twitter? Yeah, roughly. Worldwide, how long does it take an issue to reach its peak on Twitter? It takes off, everybody starts looking at it, retweeting it, forwarding it, blah blah, liking it. How long does it take? We reach its peak and then it comes off. And tomorrow, that hashtag has gone. About an hour and a half. About an hour and a half. If you come into it 3 hours later, it's gone. It's gone. If you retweet it, people have already had it. It's an hour and a half. So big issues on Twitter don't last long. And the publics that form around it move on to something else, except they don't all move on together. They all go different ways. The publics are difficult. Populations have no identified characteristics, therefore. Bloggers are independent, mainly. And responses are infinitely measurable. We can find out lots and lots and lots about social media, but what does it tell us? I'm not sure. Doesn't answer the question, does it? Thank you very much. I've got the